The global call for countries to move away from fossil fuels to cleaner energy continues to gain rapid momentum. During last year's COP2018 climate summit, held in Dubai, intense deliberations resulted in closer collaboration among nations big and small to agree on a deal on phasing down fossil fuel energy. This was a marked shift from the COP27 gathering in Egypt, where countries did not see eye to eye on the matter. Hello, and welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Sizwe Mpofu Walsh. Just energy transition has become a highly emotive and divisive topic across the world, and in South Africa, we are no exception. At the center of the debate is the inevitability of phasing out coal as one of the major contributors to carbon emissions. Coal, oil, and gas are said to be the largest contributors to global climate change. They account for over 75% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and nearly 90% of all carbon dioxide emissions. In South Africa, the bone of contention is the impact that the phasing out of coal is likely to have on jobs, lives, and livelihoods. There are calls for the country to redouble efforts to ensure that affected communities will be included in the Just Energy Transition project and be empowered to access the economic benefits it presents. To help me unpack this topic, our General Manager of Eskom's Just Energy Transition Office, Dr. Vikesh Rajpal, Founding President of African Women in Energy and Power, Ms. Bertha Dlamini, as well as Highveld Regional Chairperson of the National Union of Mine Workers, Mr. Malegutu Modubatse. On Zoom, I'm also joined by Mr. Philani Mongezulu, who is the chairperson of the Kuthala Environmental Care Group. And tonight we ask, South Africa, are you ready to abandon coal mining? Remember, you may join this discussion via X using our handle @Unfiltered SABC. Before we dive into our conversation, let's take a look at this clip by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
We are in a race against time. As I said at the opening of COP28, our planet is minutes to midnight for the 1.5 degree limit, and the clock keeps ticking.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. To embark on our discussion, we'll first begin by speaking to Mr. Mngomezulu to hear about his experiences within an affected community. Mr. Mngomezulu, could you share some of your experiences and thoughts on the impact of potentially moving away from coal-powered energy will have? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sizwe, for having me on your show. When it comes to the impacts of just transition, it's so severe in Mpumalanga province. I'm the resident of Mpumalanga province, also representing, environmental groups on the province of Mpumalanga. I'm one of those people who live on those coal-dependent communities, whereby, there's mines, there's coal-powered station, and other, means of production out of coal. The impact, of shutting down the coal in Mpumalanga, it has caused so much damage in terms of, poverty, in terms of job losses, to the people of Mpumalanga, in terms of the economy of Mpumalanga. We saw, a mass migration of workers who were working on the coal-powered station, who were working on the mines. We saw, the impact of shutting down the Komati power station and moving away from coal-powered station, creating a violence amongst community members. You realize that some of the workers that were working at Komati power station were retrenched after, the power station was decommissioned. So they have to find alternative ways, of which now, they are bubbling in the struggle of, fighting with the so-called taxi, the drivers, of which the taxi industry, because they have lost, their livelihoods. Because in Mpumalanga, it depends on coal. The economy of Mpumalanga is coal. the electricity that, the province is generating to our country, of which is 80%, is the only economy that boosts, the province of Mpumalanga. So it has a negative impact. The issue of decommissioning the power stations and the issue of moving away from the coal. But, as a people of Mpumalanga or as a resident of Mpumalanga or someone who's representing, an environmental group, the issue of just transition is like guns and roses to the people of Mpumalanga, because it carries a lot of opportunities on the other side. It carries, a lot of, negative impacts, of which we feel something must be done in terms of our government, because, there was no consultation that was done to our people in terms of, the communication of, Komati power station.
Right.
So those are the things that are impacting our communities. In particular, the issue of poverty, because, it's another, our province has to deal with this issue of, unemployment, of which is being caused, by just transition. Whereas we know very well that, even just transition on the other side, it carries a lot of, potential, job opportunities for the province of Mpumalanga.
Right.
But for now, when it comes to this, transition, there's a lot of challenges.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mngomezulu. It's always useful to have a perspective from the ground, as it were, and through community activism and the activism that you've been involved in. Dr. Rajpal, thank you very much for joining us. I suppose, how do you sum up the balance that South Africa needs to strike here? Guns and roses, as Mr. Mngomezulu puts it, is a nice way to put it. Of course, we need to keep the lights on.
Absolutely.
But of course, the climate matters, and of course, jobs matter. How do we navigate that balance in your estimation?
It's a difficult navigation, but I can't disagree with anything that has been said so far regarding the negative impact of power station shutdown, the negative impact of coal mine shutdown as well. And from an Eskom perspective, we don't have a policy of premature shutdown of any of our power stations. We acknowledge that we are in an energy crisis. We do have an energy crisis. We need as much generating capacity as possible connected to the grid. We've taken a decision not to. We had a number of power stations that were earmarked for shutdown between now and 2030, according to the IRP 2019, and we've taken a decision to halt that, to continue the operations, to allow the country space to continue to build new generating capacity. But in doing that, and significant lessons that we've learned, not just from Komati, because the energy transition started long before Komati. Eskom's power station fleet and operations and shutdown started it is 100 years now, right? And Komati is not the first power station that we've shut down. We've shut down a number of stations in the past, and the impact on those communities, it was devastating. So we've taken a decision as an organization that we cannot allow for any of our power stations to shut down without continued economic activity at those power stations.
Right. Let me bring in Ms. Dlamini, and of course we have much time this evening, okay. So there'll be more than enough time to expand further on exactly that process, Dr. Rajpal. But Ms. Dlamini, what do you make of the debate so far, the extent to which Eskom's plan is a wise one, especially this decision on the one hand to decommission many power stations and then recently to step back from that and refocus on the coal fleet?
The outcome of COP28, it was quite clear that there was an advocacy towards facing down fossil fuel. It makes sense for countries whose industrialization curve is quite advanced. It doesn't make sense for the African continent, where 600 million people still do not have access to clean, affordable energy. 900 million people don't have access to clean cooking energy. It doesn't make sense when we have to consider the necessity to secure base load to resuscitate our economy in South Africa, to ensure that it has sufficient supply of energy to grow enough for us to have an inclusive economy. So we cannot be hasty in advancing the phase out of fossil fuel without considering its national impact on our ability to support the economic growth, because energy is one of the most profound and necessary input into the performance of our economy and our ability to attract foreign direct investment, which is necessary for us to create jobs, for us to transition to decarbonized industries, not only in energy, but across productive sectors. And so we have to be very careful not to adopt strategies that sacrifice the well-being of our citizens, that sacrifice our ability to recover our economy from the impact of COVID-19 lockdown and the impact that we are facing now with the rolling load shedding schedules that we have. So I agree with Dr. Vikesh. I agree with our colleague from Mpumalanga that we have to think broadly and be more considerate with the decisions that we take. We need our coal-fired power stations. We need our mines. In fact, the countries that are advocating to shut down or to phase out fossil fuels are the ones that are purchasing high-quality coal from other countries today.
Okay, let's put that to Mr. Motubadze. And are we moving too fast away from coal? Are we moving too slow away from coal? How do you intervene in the debate, and what's the NUM perspective?
No, thank you. The perspective of the NUM is that this just energy transition, there is nothing just about it, because the communities are left behind. The workers are also left behind. So we believe that we are moving too fast, and this movement has a tendency of creating high level of unemployment. Because I can tell you now, economy of Mpumalanga, in particular, places such as Witbank, Middelburg, Ermelo, and so forth, they rely primarily on coal. So this movement and this issue that we are being forced now to move with a speed of a cheetah towards just energy transition, it is not going to do justice. We are of the view that it should be just because of its name, just energy transition. But from where we are standing, we strongly believe that we are being dictated by the West so that we can be able to satisfy them, forgetting that the economies of the West, they were built out of the very same coal that they want us now to abandon. So we strongly believe that we should be dictated. Nobody should determine the speed that we should move on. At the end of the day, it should be about our people and it should be about environment. But most importantly, we must not have a situation where our people remain unemployed.
Indeed, this evening we're talking about the just energy transition, how fast South Africa should move away from coal, if at all, how slowly, and whether we're on the correct path towards decarbonizing our economy in a just way. We'll be back after the break to look at this in more depth and take a look at some statements from the politicians in charge of this question and put them to our guests. Stick with us. One of the key questions of our time is why the lights keep going off. And underneath that question is a deeper policy debate about whether South Africa should pursue a more coal-based economy, whether it should move away from a carbonized economy, and if so, how fast. Let's take a look at what some senior politicians have been saying, and in particular, the Minister of Energy on this question.
Germany is dismantling a wind farm to expand operations of a coal mine today, as we sit here today. I can tell you that coal miners in the United States are putting pressure on President Biden to invest more on coal production. Here we say we must leave coal. I am one of the people who says we can have a transition, but that coal is not about just numbers. It's about human beings. It's 10 towns in Mpumalanga.
Dr. Rajpal, earlier in our debate, we heard from Mr. Motubatsi that we're moving too fast at the pace of a cheetah, in his vivid phrase. Are we moving too fast away from coal? And if not, why not?
We're not moving fast enough away from coal. We've taken a conscious decision to continue the operations of coal in our fleet, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to the planet. It comes at a cost to us as a species in terms of our survival. So in the energy transition, we find that a renewable energy pathway represents the least cost option from a modeling perspective and from an energy pathway perspective. It's aligned with many other studies that have been done locally as well as internationally. So our view as such, as I've indicated earlier, is not to shut down prematurely, but as and when these plants reach end of useful life, we need to build replacement capacity, but not then. We need to start doing it now. We decouple, and that's the core of our jet strategy, to decouple our repurposing and repowering initiatives from our station decommissioning schedules. And what that means is that we start building large-scale capacity to replace the capacities that will be shut down, so that when we reach the end of life of those stations, we're not in a situation that we are in currently, where we have a deficit, a mismatch between balance and supply.
Right. Mr. Motubatsi, how do you respond to that, the human cost of the carbon economy, the effect on people's lives in terms of health? That's the counter-argument to your suggestion that we're moving too fast away from coal.
One, we believe that the lifespan of a power station, it can be extended. It can be extended, and it has proven that it can be extended. One, two, we believe that instead of shutting down the power stations, we can look rather into a technology called a carbon capture. That would, of course, assist, because it is all about emissions, that it can assist to capture the carbon. For sure, you have seen when you read on the news that Geoscience, Council for Geoscience, together with Exaro, they've entered into a memorandum of understanding on how to capture carbon for storage and utilization. So instead of shutting down power stations, whereby the repercussions will be that of poverty, we must look into a cleaner technology. And it is there. It is not something that is far-fetched. There is a way of a cleaner energy by making sure that we go through the process of carbon capture, and those power stations, they continue to operate as they are operating. Because one thing that we are not being told here is that when you shut down a power station, you will find that ESCOM employees in that power station, there are maybe 500 or 600. And majority, it can be close to 2,000. It's contractors. So what will happen is that ESCOM will move their employees to the next power station. But then what about those contractors? They will be terminated and they will remain unemployed. So we don't promote and we are not supporters of shutting down of power stations.
Ms. Dlamini, where do you feature here? Because the balance between the environmental cost and the economic tension is clear. Do you think that the trajectory is too fast at the pace of a cheetah, or not fast enough?
So it's not a linear answer, and it's definitely not a linear environment. You have to consider the environmental impacts of not augmenting our existing coal-powered power stations with clean technologies, or technologies and systems that will enable them to meet the emission threshold. So that is a consideration. It is necessary. Globally, we have to be conscious of the impact of our systems on the planet. So we cannot run away from that. We have to ensure that the configuration of our energy mix secures baseload. We have to ensure that our economy has security of supply. What that mix is what the engineers will determine. How we execute that has to consider the livelihoods of communities that are reliant on legacy value chains. And we have to move with speed to educate, to reskill, and to empower them to participate in emerging value chains in the green economy now, so that there is almost a dual trajectory where people are employed in emerging value chains, they understand the constructs of those value chains, and they've identified where they can participate. And that is where we come in as an organization, delivering skills development programs that educate officials in electricity utilities, in government departments, communities and entrepreneurs on the constructs of existing value chains and emerging value chains, so that they can identify areas to enterprise, they can identify career paths now. So that when this shift takes place, truly no one is left behind. The challenge we have is we have not witnessed sufficient community education that enables community leaders and community players to identify how to participate in just energy transition strategy, design, and execution in their locality.
Right, right.
And so you have to consider the impact to the environment. You have to implement cost efficiently, given our constrained fiscal space, what is feasible, and you have to consider what we need to grow the economy.
Dr. Rajpal, I wonder to what extent modeling has been done on lives and livelihoods, and to what extent your office is doing that kind of modeling alongside and in parallel with the energy modeling that's needed. Because of course, I think what's needed in the debate is an understanding of exactly what the cost, if any, to jobs in places like Mpumalanga would be as we try to transition from this heavy coal-intensive economic model.
Yeah. Before I respond directly to that, our problem is not carbon only, right? Carbon emissions is one part of the bigger challenge. From an electricity perspective and from a local coal production perspective, we have other emissions, oxides of sulfur and nitrogen and particulates. The problem with that is that it is ambient, so it doesn't go up into the atmosphere as such. It affects those communities that have been established in and around those power stations. Civil society has taken the Minister, DFFE, to court to implement the minimum emission standards requirements because of the impact it has had on lives, on livelihoods, and on health. There are different models that have provided different numbers on the actual impact, and I wouldn't go into the details of the differences, except to say that the impact of operations and the impact of carbon, of coal, of the emissions as such as a byproduct of our operations is significant. So we cannot only talk about climate change from a carbon perspective. We need to understand that there are other factors. When we talk about carbon capture, that is addressing one part of it, it does have a direct impact on the overall cost. And we need to understand who is going to pay for that added cost of per kilowatt hour. In addition to that, given our local circumstances, we need to introduce or install flue gas desulfurization technologies. What that is that it removes sulfur from the exhaust gases of a power station. Two challenges with that. It is extremely costly and it is extremely water intensive. So for a country like South Africa that is water scarce, we often have droughts, we cannot afford the added cost of FGD as well as carbon capture. You need to factor in those costs in building new power stations. And as I've indicated earlier, when you factor those costs in, a renewables dominant mix, and nobody in Eskom is calling for a 100% renewables energy mix. It's not discussed. It is a renewables dominant mix as and when our coal-fired power stations reach end of life, as and when they're no longer economical to operate.
Just for clarity and briefly before I come back to other guests, what is that date and what timeframes are you working with? Are you talking about the 2050 date or the 2030 period?
The Integrated Resources Plan 2019 had identified a number of power stations that would be decommissioned between now and 2030. Right? Camden, Grootplay, Hendrina, Arnott, and Creel. In our current thinking, should I say, we are looking at continuing the operation of these plants until 2030. Now we have, from an MES, a minimum emission standards requirement, we cannot continue operating these plants beyond that unless we get permission from the Minister of DFFE, and it's not up to her because there's currently, as I indicated earlier, there was litigation. She has appointed expert panels to review the position.
Right.
And just bear in mind one important thing. Very often when we talk about load shedding and we talk about the mismatch between supply and demand, very often Eskom is forced to to reduce load at some of our power stations in order to comply with our emissions standards. And it's not a negative thing, it is because of our social and environmental responsibility to comply with legislation and to comply with those requirements.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Motubatsi, before we go to a break, could I just ask you to respond to that? Because you did propose the carbon capture technology. Who carries the cost for that? And the question of the health of communities and indeed workers in and around these coal-intensive power plants?
It should be government, because I don't think that a responsible government can allow a situation whereby there is high level of unemployment while there is a solution to that. You see, if we were saying that there is nothing that we can bring on the table, then it was going to be something else. But now we're saying that there is a solution. A solution to that is carbon capture. And you look at countries such as South Korea, they are in China as well. They are looking into that. So why can't we do the same as South Africa? So we believe that government should budget for carbon capture so that employment can be sustainable in those areas. As for the issue that has been raised, he has spoken about the expensive of sulfur that of course can assist, but the problem is that it is expensive. We really also need to look into that, because it must be budgeted for, so that at the end of the day, the communities around those power stations, they cannot find themselves sick because of the emissions that are being produced from those power stations. So it is very much important that you have a responsible government that is planning for the future. This government must not plan to close power stations. They must plan to say, how are we going to better the situation that we are currently confronted with? They must come with a solution of how are we going to deal with emissions and so forth.
We'll continue our debate and our conversation after the break. This evening we're discussing the just energy transition. How quickly or how slowly should South Africa be moving towards this transition? And when we come back from the break, we're going to be looking at some of the case studies of power stations that have been shut down and the geopolitical landscape of climate change funding. Stick with us. Welcome back to Unfiltered. This evening we're discussing the just energy transition. Before we get back into our debate, let's have a look at this conversation that I had with the Minister of Electricity on the shutting down of the Komati power station.
It doesn't augur well when you accelerate the decommissioning of these megawatts when in fact you are sitting with an energy deficit. And the fourth and last consideration with regards to that just energy transition is your ability to industrialize on the back of this crisis, to ensure that because they see through of demand with regards to renewable solar PV, battery and inverters, that you are able to create an industry, an economy, and you allow your development finance institution to aggressively invest in local production, manufacturing, so that as you transition, you create new skills because we are creating a demand.
Ms. Dlamini, let's come to the Komati case study, because it's a key example of whether this should have happened or shouldn't have happened, and it really makes the debate more tangible. Do you think it was a good or a bad idea to decommission Komati when we did?
So I will use Mr. Mungomesi's a metaphor, roses and guns, as he called it. So one could perhaps say that it was decommissioned quickly, but when you do look at the analysis and its performance, it was already at the tail end of its performance. So the decision to decommission Komati would have been rational. What has been done after decommissioning Komati and the the different technologies that were piloted within the asset is quite fantastic. It's a demonstration of how an integrated energy mix can benefit a community, can repurpose an asset more effectively, giving the opportunity to train on different technologies that mirror the renewable energy space or the renewable energy sector that we are building. So there are quite a number of perspectives to that question. I don't think there is a direct yes or no, but it's a fact that at the point when it was decommissioned, it was literally not performing at a superior rate. What has happened to demonstrate what just energy transition could be, or maybe let's just focus on energy transition, has actually created a template for future decommissioning of power stations where the asset itself can be repurposed and other technologies can be introduced. We're quite happy that both in the, I think, IRP 19 and 2023, the draft that is currently out for public comment, nuclear energy is one of the technologies that will be explored. So if you consider small modular reactors and the land mass that exists in some of the stations, you can build a skill pool, you can build SMMEs around a value chain, and you can repurpose it for such technologies which enable the power station or the asset to still generate power and contribute to the sustainability of the grid.
Mr. Motubatsi, it's an interesting point made by Ms. Dlamini that, and also want to get your perspective on Komati, was that the right decision or the wrong decision and the timing of it, but also that a decommissioning doesn't necessarily mean losing the asset, and is one of the solutions repurposing the asset to keep jobs, even if the coal base of the asset is transitioned out. Your thoughts?
No. Firstly, what clear is the that it was premature. The intention was to impress the IMF and the World Bank to mark the register that we are doing something in South Africa, so that the loan that was promised to South Africa can get into the bank account. So we believe that it was not calculative. In actual fact, even the very same minister that you have just played his clip here, when we had a discussion with him, he considered that it was premature. We were not supposed to do it. But we have indicated that the intention was just to impress the IMF. The issue of repurposing, it's neither here nor there. We are saying that because we were promised that they will be bringing some agricultural activities in that particular power station. There is none. You see, what is most painful is that next to Komati there is a school, a primary school, that relied on Komati power station in terms of food, uniform. These are the kids that come from the surroundings and they are from poor families. So now Komati is no longer there. We went there, we spoke with the teachers. They are saying, we are now suffering. So the closure of Komati did not only deal with the workers there, but it also dealt with future generation. Because these students now, they can no longer benefit from Komati as they used to previously. So we are saying that it was not supposed to have happened. Government just implemented in a rush approach.
Dr. Rajpal, how do you respond to the closure of Komati and it being premature?
Komati was not shut down at the behest of the World Bank or IMF. It was shut down because of its performance, because of the cost of operating the plant. It had reached, bear in mind, Komati was built in 1961. It was already 60 years old when the last unit was shut down. The performance of that last unit, it was actually, it was dragged over the line as such. It was defined in the IRP 2019 or identified to be shut down in 2018. Bear in mind that Komati was mothballed in the 90s, actually late 80s, early 90s. So this is, or that was the second life for Komati. When it was brought back to service, it was evaluated for a further 15 years of operation. That was the basis of the work that was done at Komati for extended life. The fact is, as a country, we did not build new generating capacity according to the plans that that was defined in the IRP 2010, 2019. We would not be having a discussion about baseload, we would not be having a discussion about an energy deficit had the country built new generating capacity. This power station was shut down because, as I mentioned it already, costs and technology and performance. As an organization, we could not shut down that plant and walk away as we did in the past. We shut down Wilka, we shut down Colenso, Newcastle, a number of other power stations where, as I mentioned upfront, the impact on those communities and the economy was devastating. So we have learned from that, because not everything is perfect at Komati. I acknowledge that. We should have started a lot earlier. We should have built new generating capacity. We should have had continuation of economic activity at Komati Power Station, independent of the coal-fired power station's operations. We have taken those lessons. We are now implementing those lessons at other power stations, not with the intention of shutting down those stations prematurely, but going back to the concept of decoupling station decommissioning from repurposing and repowering, so that we find, firstly, new generating capacity from, as the Minister indicated, solar PV, battery energy storage, wind, and synchronous condensers to support the grid. In addition to that, repurposing, finding alternative economic activity so that the economy in those areas do not suffer.
But do we know what economic impact that has had, and
Yes.
how many jobs were lost versus how many were regained?
We've conducted socio-economic impact assessments of all 10 fired power stations in the area, and the reports are there. It's not necessarily at this stage in public domain. The Komati report is in the public domain. I can confirm that the conclusion is that the impact is significant. We cannot shut down those power stations and walk away. We need to have a just energy transition in place. We need to have those plans in place. We need to have repurposing and repowering initiatives that not only brings in new generating capacity, but also, as I mentioned upfront, finds alternative economic activity. We heard about agricultural activity. That is one example of what could happen at a power station. We're looking at alternatives like taking ash, manufacturing bricks for ash beneficiation, extracting rare earth metals from a value perspective, looking at large-scale agricultural activities, which was mentioned. When the power station reaches end of life, when you can no longer utilize that asset, extracting the copper, recycling that copper, taking that copper and putting it into a transformer that would be used, or a switchgear that would be used across the country. The options are vast and the opportunities are vast, and we need to work together. It is not Eskom alone that can solve this. It is Eskom, government, private participants, NGOs. We all need to work together, organized labor as well, to ensure that we do have a transition that is truly just.
Let's go to a break. We're discussing the just energy transition. We've been on the case study of the Komati power station, whether it should or shouldn't have been shut down. And when we come back from the break, we'll explore what the potential ways forward are for this just energy transition, which is a debate that's been with us for a very long time, but is set to be with us for many decades to come. Don't go anywhere as we discuss solutions going forward. Welcome back to Unfiltered. The just energy transition has been one of the key debates in the South African political landscape over the last decade, and it will be with us for many a year to come. This evening, we're discussing the just energy transition with a panel of experts and players in the energy field. And let's come to some of your comments on social media. Mzuvukile says South Africa is not ready to abandon coal mining. Coal mining is a bread and butter to other people, and coal mining also forms part of our economy. And one other social media intervention from Princey says SA is not ready to abandon coal, especially since they don't have a dispatchable power source to replace it with. We're going to bring back in Mr. Mngomezulu for this final segment, who at the top of the show shared with us some of his experiences and the experiences of Mpumalanga communities with the transition away from coal mining. Mr. Mngomezulu, thank you very much for joining us to conclude this show again. And could I just ask you about your thoughts on the way forward and the solutions to overcome these problems? On the one hand, we've got the question of coal and its impact on the climate and health. On the other, we've got jobs, the economy, and making sure we keep the lights on. What is the way forward from your perspective?
No, thank you so much, yes, for this opportunity. I think now I'm comfortable. Yes, we do have, a way forward when it comes to this, just transition. Because already, the just transition is in motion. It's been, enrolled to our communities. The just transition is taking place. We've been talking about the decommissioning of power station. That simply means, Komati is no more. So we need to find an alternative way. We need to find, how are we going to, adapt and mitigate the situation so that we can be able, to replace the jobs that are being lost through, decommissioning. So, as people of Mpumalanga, what we mean by just transition, because we have come up with our own, open agenda, called Just Transition Open Agenda. What this, Mpumalanga open agenda, Just Transition, say to us, the context of, the open agenda, it talks about energy on its own, of which we know South Africa is having, the crisis of energy. We are talking about the commissioning of the coal power station and so on and so on. We are talking about the mines. We are talking about the people who are losing, their jobs on the value chains, the hawkers and so on, and the community members. So what are we saying? We are saying the just transition can be just, and the just transition, we know for a fact that it carries a lot of potentials in terms of way forward. Number one, let me talk about only just transition, of which is just energy transition. We need to consider these new special projects that are coming, with just transition. Projects like, green hydrogen ammonia that can be able to generate energy for our communities and be able to replace, the people that have lost their livelihoods, their jobs and everything, at Komati, and be able to be, to reskill all the workers that have lost their jobs. Those are the things that we want to do in terms of making sure that there's restorative justice when it comes to just transition. In terms of the energy, we need to look at other, avenues like your gas and oil that can have, a positive impact, on our economy and be able to revitalize, in Mpumalanga province. We are not just looking on that one, when it comes to this just transition, we are looking at, people living with climate impacts. As you know, South Africa has been, engulfed by a lot of floods and a lot of, environmental catastrophic. Like yesterday in Mpumalanga, it was, a lot of people were victimized by the floods, and they have lost their, their belongings.
Right.
Based on this, of which is something that we have to address, of which is something that we cannot keep under the table. It's something that is a reality, it's something that we have to live on. So we are saying we must come up with other alternative way and see how can we live with this, climate impacts at the end of the day. We need to look at the issue of health, how are we going to improve our health system and create job opportunities out of this just transition? We need to look, at our transportation. How can we come up with other alternative ways that can be able to generate income for these, workers and the people of Mpumalanga in terms of transportation, in terms of communication. As we all know that Mpumalanga is it's an agricultural province. So we need to center, agriculture in the center of just transition so that we can be able to replace the job that we are losing as.
Right. Let me put some of those solutions, Mr. Mngomezulu, to our panel as we chart the way forward. Mr. Motubatsi, what do you make of the way forward? What solutions do you believe would be the right way forward for this difficult balance that our country finds itself having to tread?
No, we surely move from the premise that says we have witnessed devastating factors that transpired when Komati power station was closed. So we don't think that we want to find ourselves in the very same situation. So before a power station can be closed, at least government and together with ESCOM, they must make sure that there will be economic activities that are going to happen in the near future. You must not close a power station, and after 2 years, nothing is happening in that particular power station. But again, we are not proponents of closure of power stations. We are saying that we strongly believe that if we can have a government that is willing to protect the employment of its citizens, they must surely look into budgeting for carbon capture, because it has been proven that carbon capture is a panacea. So we do have a panacea on top of the table. So there is no need for us to be closing 11 to 12 power stations merely because we want to impress IMF and World Bank. And we want to emphasize this. They wanted to impress IMF and the World Bank. It was a tick box exercise. They wanted to go to the IMF and say, we have closed one power station, so give us the money. So we don't want to see that particular situation happening. We are saying, government, look into the carbon capture so that our people or the communities around those particular power stations can still have a livelihood that is able to take care of their children. That is our position.
Ms. Dlamini, your closing thoughts?
So we have a profound responsibility to educate communities on what the just energy transition is, what the energy transition is, to enable the just element of it. So one is getting communities to participate not only in advocacy, but also in owning renewable energy projects, enabling communities to own small-scale renewable energy projects. So that means they'll be trained, they'll have skills to build, skills to own and to run enterprises. That will be one very powerful development if we can advance that as a country. Number two is when we talk about ensuring that we move at a rationalized pace as a country, it does not mean that we should not consider other renewable energy technologies. It only means that we need to have a considered energy mix that secures a supply of energy, reboots our economy so that the economy can grow. When the economy grows, we can collect more taxes. When we collect more taxes, government can budget for such socio-economic interventions. But without the input of energy, this cycle is not going to take place. It's not going to happen. And so it's not a linear answer. It's not either or. It's not coal or renewable energy. It's an integrated solution that safeguards the livelihoods of South Africans.
Dr. Rajpal, your final thoughts.
As an organization, we are technology agnostic, provided it is low cost, provided it is low carbon, low emissions in general, not necessarily carbon, and provided it can be built quickly enough to address the capacity constraints and shortages that we have. My comment is not on, we're not anti-coal or anti-any technology. My comment that I'm going to make now is not an anti-coal one. Mpumalanga has the largest number of coal mines in the country, largest number of coal-fired power stations. The official unemployment rate in Mpumalanga is 45%. That excludes youth unemployment. The youth unemployment is significantly higher. The energy transition provides us with significant opportunities to address from a procedural, from a distributive, and from a restorative justice perspective, opportunities to address some of the imbalances so that we can reindustrialize the economy, we can build new generating capacity, and we can address and move forward together as we address these challenges. And again, it's not an ESCOM problem, it is a country problem, and we need to address it and address the opportunities together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of my panelists this evening who've given us a fascinating perspective from multiple angles on the question of the just energy transition as South Africa balances the imperatives of a clean and safe environment with an unemployment and load shedding crisis. It's a difficult question to balance, but tonight hopefully we've given you some insight into the questions and the answers that can be made to those questions on the just energy transition. Thank you for joining us for another installment of Unfiltered Views, Unfiltered News and Unfiltered Conversations. And let's continue this conversation on social media at Unfiltered SABC. Hope you have a good evening and good luck, Bafana Bafana.